Hello to you, my very best friend. Welcome to another video. In this video, we're going to be doing something that I feel like I haven't done on this channel in a very long time, which is actually talk about fragrances. I have done so much yapping in my last few videos. Ugh, I'm sitting there editing them thinking somebody shut this guy up already. So today, very simple concept. We're just going to talk about my favorite fragrances, the ones that I consider to be 10s out of 10s, and also, spoiler alert, some 11s out of 10s, but we'll cross those bridges when we get there. I thought about giving this whole spiel about what I thought made a fragrance a 10 out of 10, but really, who cares? All it boils down to is that these are fragrances that connect with me on a level deeper than just liking something, and these are fragrances that have no elements to them that I would change. And that's pretty much it. No crazy rating system, no mountain of criteria. I like what I like. So let's kick this off with everybody's buddy, Gris Charnel by BDK, the eau de parfum specifically. If you have never smelled Gris Charnel before, it is a combination of this really beautiful sweetness and woods. It is known specifically for its notes of fig, black tea, and cardamom. I don't really know whether I get those things necessarily when I smell it. The cardamom, sure, but the other two, not quite as much. I think they're more there to smooth out that sweetness. It's very relaxed. A lot of people refer to it as a rainy day scent, which I can totally see. I know that Gris Charnel is hyped and it's a little bit basic, and it's always popular to hate on things that are both of those, but I really think that Gris Charnel is special. It smells incredible. It's highly versatile. I think it can be worn by anyone at any time, and I think its performance is super underrated. The eau de parfum for me is a 10 to 12 hour fragrance, and especially for those first few hours, I find it really radiates off the skin. It's strong but inoffensive, which I think is a great combination. Now, speaking of performance, again, this is the eau de parfum, which I much prefer to the extrait, which is kind of silly because they smell pretty similar. I think that the eau de parfum is a perfect 50-50 balance where 50% is that dreamy sweetness and 50% is that woodiness. And to me, the extrait is like 60% that woodiness and 40% that dreamy sweetness. It's barely different, but at the same time, I think cutting out that sweetness is cutting out what makes it so unique and so good. And also, because it's an extrait and because it's much woodier, it is much heavier, meaning that it sits closer to the skin, it doesn't project nearly as well. I guess in theory it lasts longer, but again, the eau de parfum is like a 10 to 12 hour fragrance. The extrait is maybe a bit longer, and with all of those trade-offs, the extrait is about $100 more. So if you are interested in Gris Charnel, it is definitely worth trying out both of them if you can. For me personally, the extrait is still really, really good. It's still a 9 out of 10, but the eau de parfum to me is superior in pretty much all ways. I think if you're looking for a very high quality, very likable, sweet, woody fragrance, it doesn't get much better than this. So next up on the list from the house of Aaron Terrence Hughes is Supernova. Now, Supernova is an Aventus-like, and I'm making a face because I feel like by saying that it's in the Aventus genre, I am grouping it in with a bunch of fragrances that aren't nearly as good as Supernova is. In all honesty, of all of the Aventus-likes, including Aventus itself, I think that Supernova is the best of them. The opening of Supernova is special. It is the single best fruity opening of any fragrance I've ever smelled. With Aventus and Aventus likes, I feel like they are a combination of citruses that are being brought together to smell sort of like pineapple. But with Supernova, the difference is that it is a lot of the same citruses brought together to just smell good. The quality is so insanely high. It's light and it's airy, it's effervescent. It's just a beautiful, beautiful citrus. And what makes Supernova stand apart from the rest of the Aventus likes is Supernova's base is ambergris. I get a very strong ambergris, amber extreme type of feel to it, as well as ambroxan, of course. And that does a couple of things. Firstly, it gives it its own identity. It's very clearly in the Aventus genre and similar to the Aventus likes, but it stands out on its own. And what it also does is it gives Supernova potentially the most insane projection and sillage I've ever smelled in any fragrance so far. One spray is pretty much a room filler. Even though Aventus likes are a dime a dozen, it's a very crowded genre, I think that Supernova stands out from the rest of them. It's an easy 10 out of 10. It's super easy to wear, extremely likable. Like I said, performance, unbelievable. And considering how quickly it sells out every time they do an ATH restock, good luck getting your hands on it. Speaking of fragrances that are difficult, if not impossible, to get your hands on nowadays, the next 10 out of 10 on my list is Yves Saint Laurent's L'Homme Libre. I've talked about this a little bit recently. This was really the fragrance for me. I think I had a few others at the time that I got this, but this was the one that really connected with me as a person, which you can see by the dent in it, which admittedly isn't that impressive of a dent, but I'm a sissy sprayer and this is the biggest dent I have in any bottle I own. Now the smell of this is weird, and that's kind of what I like about it. I don't know whether that was the style of fragrances at the time or whether it is just my nostalgia throwing me back to a time where I didn't know as much as I do now, but there is just something about the fragrances of the late 2000s to mid 2010s, I guess, where it was like they were trying to come up with fragrances that did not smell like any real thing. Around that time, I always felt like when I walked into the few stores that were selling fragrances, that I was constantly being assaulted with all of these weird smells that I couldn't place. And even now, owning this for 7 or 8 years, I guess, I still find it very difficult to describe what it smells like. I think primarily it is a violet leaf fragrance, and I know that a lot of people say that violet leaf smells kind of like gasoline, and that kind of describes Lone Libra. It's more like the feeling that you get, that sharp pain that comes from smelling gasoline, but imagine if that smelled good. It is potent, it is striking, but it's sweet. Like, it smells wearable. I know the notes say that there's spices and herbs and stuff like basil and star anise and nutmeg, and yeah, I mean, I guess. But I think that comes together to smell like the best descriptor, which is sweet gasoline that smells good. Again, I don't know if someone would smell this nowadays and be blown away. I don't know whether it is as good as I think it is or whether I am just tainted by nostalgia. But either way, this is still a very special fragrance for me. It is the one that got me into the hobby, and I'm sad that it has been discontinued and very few other people will get to enjoy it like I have. I know that you can get bottles of it on eBay. I would caution against doing that for a few reasons. Firstly, it's ridiculously expensive, and secondly, this bottle, which I believe was a 2014, maybe 2015, I have taken very, very good care of it in the time since. For probably 3/4 of that time, it has sat in the box. It has never been in direct sunlight or extreme temperatures or anything like that. And despite all of that, it is kind of a shell of its former self. It's only slightly better than water. It lasts for 45 minutes or so, and then it's completely gone. So if I have taken good care of it and it has still fallen off, I don't know how much I would trust some random person on eBay selling it for $400. But despite all of that, even though it's not quite the fragrance that it used to be, it still holds a very special place in my heart. It is and will forever be my very first 10 out of 10. Next up, we have two fragrances from what I personally think might be one of the most underrated houses on the market today. We have 1001 and Narcosis by Vertus. So this is actually kind of a funny combo of fragrances for me. I did a video a couple of months ago where I ranked the 9 fragrances in my Vertus Discovery set from worst to best. Narcosis was first, and 1001 was, I believe, 7th, maybe even 8th. At the time, I really did not like it at all, and clearly it has grown on me in the time since. I think one night I randomly got a hankering to wear it, and by the end of the night I was purchasing a full bottle. So 1001 is a complex fragrance, and that was kind of what I didn't like about it at first. I thought that it was so complex that it got to the point where it was muddy. It was difficult to figure out what it was trying to do. As you will see by the notes that I will put up on screen here, there's a whole lot going on. So the main thing that I smell in 1001 is lime, supported very much by the cinnamon and cardamom and ginger listed in the notes. There's a whole bunch of florals listed. I don't know whether I can pick any of them out specifically, save for rose. And that all combines with what I think is Vertus's signature amber, which is very sweet. Where was I? The amber. The amber is very sweet. It almost smells candied in a way. Once you can wrap your head around what's going on, it's really a beautiful composition, one that I regret not giving full credit to at first. Oh, and I completely forgot to mention the saffron in here. Saffron is a note that I sometimes have trouble with because I find that it is either non-existent or it is far too strong. This is like the perfect amount. I think it is the best saffron note I've ever smelled in any fragrance. So if it sounds interesting to you, give it a try and give it a couple more tries. Don't just turn your nose up at it instantly like I did. Now, Narcosis, on the other hand, was an instant love for me. The primary things that you're going to smell in Narcosis are coffee, rhubarb, and mango. I know that this isn't always the case, but I find notes like that are generally supporting players rather than the stars of the show, and that's part of what I think makes Narcosis so good, is this combination of let's call them lesser used notes. It's unique. It doesn't really smell like anything else, but at the same time, it's not strange or difficult to parse. It's such an interesting fragrance, such a unique one, and the performance here is outrageous. I don't know whether I would say it's necessarily the strongest fragrance I own, but it is one that projects the hardest for the longest. Where most really strong fragrances might lessen to, a small little bit of projection after a couple of hours, Narcosis just kind of keeps going. It doesn't really stop, I don't think. It's not going to fill a room in the same way as, say, Supernova would, but this is just more consistently loud. Really, really good. Again, super unique. I love this fragrance, and I did from the first sniff. A super underrated fragrance from a super underrated house. Next up, we have another duo of fragrances from a single house, that being the house of can't really get it to stand up. Sorora. So my first 10 out of 10 from Sorora is Orchid Rouge. Orchid Rouge is another tough one to describe because, as you may have guessed, it doesn't really smell like anything. I think the best way that I can describe it is when it is late spring, early summer, you are out for a walk and there's a big tree with all of these big flowers blooming on it. Petals are everywhere scattered across the ground. That softly sweet floral smell that wafts to you on the breeze is pretty close to what Orchid Rouge smells like. It is that, also mixed with a fairly prominent almond note. The almond is not deep or heavy, it's not an extremely nutty fragrance. More, it just works together with the floral components. They are two elements which support each other. There's also something about it that is distinctly lipsticky or makeup-y. I don't know if there's iris in it, but it gives you that same feeling without being feminine. There's also just a very soft vanillic aspect to it as well, and it's just a gorgeous fragrance. Really, the fragrance itself is an 11 out of 10 for me. The only thing that maybe drops it down to a 10 out of 10 is that its performance is variable. When I first got this sample, the performance was bad. It was a skin scent that lasted about 45 minutes and that was it. And now that the sample has had time to sit and mature some, I don't know whether I would say that the performance has necessarily gotten better, but it certainly has become more unpredictable. I took this with me on vacation to the Dominican Republic and I wore it twice. One day it was low 30s and it was gone within about 45 minutes. I wore it the next day when it was again low 30s and it lasted all day. So I don't know what the variable is. Even with that said, I still think this is one of my favorite fragrances maybe ever. I have been nursing this tiny little last bit of sample for the past 6 months, I guess. Even with its performance issues, easy 10 out of 10. And the second Sorora fragrance, this is the first 11 out of 10 on the list, is Mandor. This is another funny one for me to include on this list because it is a leather fragrance and I hate leather. It is potentially my least favorite note in fragrances, but for whatever reason there is just something about Mandor that speaks to me, and it has from the moment I first smelled it. It is primarily leather, but there are also supporting elements of cherry and almond and vanilla, and I think ultimately what makes it so pleasing to me to smell is that the leather is not realistic. I've never really understood wanting to walk around smelling like an old jacket or a baseball glove. I almost think of Mandor's leather as being like a fantasy leather. Instead of smelling photorealistic, it smells like somebody's idealized version of leather. It is both sweet and dark, two things that I think are generally in opposition to each other, but in Mandor it smells cohesive. It works as a single composition. It's deep and rich, it's very powerful as you'd expect from a leather fragrance. It's wildly long-lasting, this is an all-day scent for me, and this is a fragrance that is hard for me to describe really why I like it so much. There's just something about it that meshes with me. I'm sure you have things like that too, whether it be a song or a movie or a book or any kind of art, where for some inexplicable reason, something about it is just you. And in that same way, as silly as it sounds, Mandor is me. So if you think that a sweet, dark cherry fragrance sounds interesting to you, but you don't like leather, don't hesitate to check Mandor out. Coming from a certified leather hater, this is a fragrance that I have to stop myself from wearing every day. It is just that good. Mandor is our first 11 out of 10 on this list. Next up, we have another duo of fragrances from the same house. This might potentially be my favorite house on the market. It is the House of Xerjoff. Now, this first Xerjoff fragrance is one that I debated putting on this list. And if you've heard me speak about it before, you will know why. The first 10 out of 10 Xerjoff for me is Alexandria Oriental. So the reason why I was debating putting Alex O on this list is because it does smell like poop, like dookie straight out of a butt. There's really no way around it. When people talk about barnyard or fecal oud, this is exactly what they mean. But the good news is that that only lasts for 15 minutes. And once that doo-doo smell blissfully fades, somehow magically you are left with luxury. It is a spicy rose oud that is very heavy on the oud. And when you smell it, you can tell that no expense was spared in its making. It just smells expensive. And it is, to be fair. A lot of people consider Alexandria 2 to be one of the best fragrances that Xerjoff has ever made. And having smelled Alex 2 and Alex 3, I really think that Alexandria Oriental is the best version of that DNA. I think Alex 2 is a little intense, maybe just a little bit harsh. You might call it purposefully commanding. Alex 3 is much sweeter, much more mass appealing because the rose has been cranked up to 11, and Alex O cranks up the oud. It makes it deeper and softer, and even though it's still a very dressy fragrance, it's oddly comforting. It is somehow both a black tie fancy dinner party fragrance and also a cozy up on a rainy day fragrance. The increased oud of Alexandria Oriental does make it poopy, but in the long run what it does is it beefs up those elements that make it smell so rich and luxurious. It eliminates any harshness, it smooths any rough edges, it makes it a little less grating than I find Alexandria 2 to be. Again, it's really tough to recommend because of that pretty miserable opening. I think that Alexandria Oriental is the best rose oud on the market. Yes, it's a little bit funky at first. If you give it more than just that initial 15-minute blast, I really think that you will find that it smells amazing, even if it smells a little bit like poop at first. Okay, now on to a Xerjoff that I have absolutely no trouble recommending. This is my favorite fragrance ever made. It is an easy 11 out of 10 for me. This is Xerjoff's Tony Iommi Monkey Special. So if you have never smelled this, the main things that you are going to get from it are patchouli, caramel, and rum. And a lot of people talk about its passion fruit opening. I love passion fruit, and I don't really get that at all when I smell this, but a lot of people talk about it, and I am the only one who has mentioned that they don't smell it, so maybe I'm the one who's wrong. I've spoken about this before, but Iommi Monkey Special is, for me, inescapably nostalgic. I don't mean that it smells dated or it is a classical style of perfumery. I mean that it reminds me of all the places that I used to go as a young man in the punk scene. All of the parties I used to go to, all of the people I would meet, all of the bands we would see play, all of the friends I made. Iommi Monkey Special is like if you took all of those memories, distilled them down to only their best parts, and put them in a fragrance. For that reason, I can't guarantee that everyone will like it as much as I do, because my feelings on it are tied so much to me and my own experiences. But putting all of that aside, I do think that it is objectively a great fragrance. If its scent profile sounds interesting to you, it has everything you could ever want. It not only smells great, its projection and longevity is incredible, and the quality is as good as it gets. For me personally, this is an 11 out of 10. This is my favorite fragrance ever made, Xerjoff's Tony Iommi Monkey Special. So we just talked about my personal, subjective favorite fragrance of all time, and I wanted to talk about what I think might be one of the objective best fragrances ever made. Now, no matter what thing you are talking about, there will always be someone who doesn't like it. There will always be that 10th dentist who looks at something that is widely loved and goes, nope, that sucks. If I had to pick a fragrance that I felt would be loved by as many people as possible, a fragrance that I think would be as difficult to hate as possible, it would be this one. 10th and final on my list, the last 11 out of 10. This is Vhavan by Les Indemodab. I don't know that there is any combination of words that I can put together that will adequately describe just how good this is. It is warm and comfortable and at the same time energetic and charismatic. It is equal parts 5-star Manhattan hotel and the most fun, exciting club in Havana. I was going to say that the only bad thing about it was its price, but honestly, I think that it's worth every penny. You are getting everything you could want from a fragrance of that price range, wrapped up inside potentially one of the most likable scent profiles ever made. You have that addictive sweetness of the tobacco and vanilla and amber, smoothed out with a deep, almost velvety chocolate and rum. It is the best, the highest quality versions of those ingredients combined perfectly. It is a fragrance that I think is difficult, if not impossible, to find faults with. Trying to choose one fragrance that I think would be the best fragrance of all time would be madness, but if I had to pick one that I thought would tick as many boxes for as many people as possible, Vhavan would be my pick. If you can get your hands on a sample of this, I strongly urge you to do so. I think it is perfect. I think fragrances like these are what being a fragrance lover is all about. So that has been this video. That was my list of 10s and 11s out of 10s, my favorite fragrances ever. Please do let me know in the comments what your favorites are, because I am a fragrance freak and I'm always on the lookout for new stuff. Now, I did plan on this video being around the 10 to 12 minute mark. Whoops. So if you are still here, still watching, thank you so much for doing so. I really do appreciate it. And as always, I will see you later. Goodbye.